We live in the most connected era in human history. More people, more messages, more notifications, more ways to talk. And yet loneliness has become one of the defining conditions of modern life. Surveys across US, UK, Europe and East Asia show large numbers of people who say they feel isolated, even when they're surrounded by others. In many places, the loneliest group isn't the elderly, but people under 35. Chronic loneliness raises the risk of premature death by more than 20%. And governments now describe it as a public health threat on a par with obesity. Hi, I'm Samantha and this is Context Wise, where I make complex topics clear. Today we're breaking down the loneliness epidemic, why it's happening, who it affects most, and what it reveals about the way we redesigned modern society. Loneliness isn't simply being alone. Psychologists draw a critical distinction between social isolation and loneliness. You can be socially isolated and not lonely, and conversely, you can be constantly surrounded by people and still feel deeply lonely. That distinction matters because modern loneliness is less about being alone and more about feeling unseen. Loneliness shows up in three forms: intimate loneliness, where a person has no close confidant or partner; relational loneliness, where they lack close, dependable friends; and collective loneliness, where someone lacks a sense of belonging to a group, community, or shared identity. The epidemic we're seeing today cuts across all three. Humans simply aren't built for this. For most of human history, survival depended on being part of a group. Our bodies still treat loneliness as a threat. When people feel chronically lonely, their stress systems stay switched on. Heart rate and blood pressure rise, inflammation goes up, sleep quality goes down. Over years, that steady trickle of stress wears the body down, significantly raising the risk of anxiety, depression, heart disease, stroke, and dementia. On a societal level, widespread loneliness shows up as lower trust, weaker communities, and fewer people participating in shared life. Loneliness isn't just a biological signal, it's a warning sign about how society is functioning. Is loneliness getting worse? The answer is complicated. Some measures show clear signs of decline in social connection. In the United States, national social surveys show a sharp decline in close relationships. A few decades ago, most people reported having several close friends. Today, the share of Americans with no close friends at all has quadrupled. In the United Kingdom, around 3.7 million adults say they feel lonely often or always. The most notable part is who reports it most. People aged 16 to 29 are the loneliest age group in the country, despite being the most digitally connected. In Japan, surveys highlight significant levels of loneliness across age groups, and the country has seen increasing cases of social withdrawal, known as Hikikomori, where individuals retreat from society for months or even years. Not all Hikikomori cases stem from loneliness, but the scale of the phenomenon signals a deeper breakdown in social connection. Across countries and age groups, there are growing signs of social disconnection. This is a measurable shift, and it forces a simple question. If we have more ways to connect than ever before, why are so many people struggling to feel connected at all? Loneliness took root because the structure of everyday life changed faster than our social instincts could adapt. Work is one of the biggest shifts. Longer hours, unstable contracts, remote work, and constant job switching mean fewer shared routines and weaker bonds. Housing has played a major role too. Rising rents and house prices push people further away from friends and family and work. People move more often and stay for shorter periods. Then there is the disappearance of shared social spaces. Places where people once gathered without planning, without cost, and without pressure have steadily declined. Community centres closed, local clubs faded, religious participation dropped. Even informal spaces like pubs and cafes have become more expensive and less accessible. Social media filled part of the gap, but it did not replace what was lost. That matters because the way we connect shapes what we value. Online connection is not inherently shallow, but most major platforms are designed to prioritize visibility, speed, and engagement over depth. Alongside these changes, modern culture has increasingly equated adulthood with independence. In the 20th century, as industrial economies expanded, economic security became something individuals were expected to earn, rather than something groups provided. Over time, that economic shift became a cultural value. Self-sufficiency was praised, reliance on others was quietly reframed as weakness, so to admit needing help or experiencing loneliness feels like failure. But humans are not designed to operate as isolated units. Loneliness is not just private pain, it has public consequences. When loneliness becomes widespread, it changes the texture of society, and one of the clearest places this shows up is trust. Countries and communities with stronger social connections consistently report higher levels of interpersonal trust, higher participation in civic life, and greater resilience during periods of crisis. You can see this clearly in Nordic countries. Nations like Denmark, Norway, and Finland consistently rank among the highest in social trust globally. During crises, including the COVID pandemic, these countries saw higher compliance with public guidance and stronger confidence in institutions, not because of enforcement, but because people trusted one another and the systems around them. Where trust erodes, the picture looks very different. In the United States, political polarization has intensified sharply over recent decades, with growing distance between social groups and declining confidence in shared institutions. This fragmentation has unfolded alongside rising loneliness and social disconnection, reinforcing each other over time and creating conditions in which mistrust spreads more easily. When people feel disconnected, they become more hungry for identity, certainty, and belonging. That makes them more susceptible to movements and communities that offer simple explanations and intense affiliations. Loneliness creates the conditions where people will accept belonging at a high price, and that is how a public health issue becomes a social stability issue. Not because lonely people are dangerous, but because loneliness makes societies easier to fragment, easier to polarize, and harder to hold together. In 2018, the United Kingdom became the first country in the world to appoint a Minister for Loneliness after research showed that millions of people were experiencing chronic isolation with clear health and economic costs. Similar initiatives have since appeared across Europe. In Japan and South Korea, governments have responded to rising rates of social withdrawal and solitary deaths by creating dedicated agencies and funding programs aimed at reducing isolation. But recognition does not mean resolution. Loneliness is increasingly recognized as a collective problem, but it is still largely managed as an individual one. Modern loneliness is difficult to address because it is a design problem. It is a consequence of how we organize work, housing, technology, and adulthood itself. Reorganizing society around human connection would require structural changes that are slow, expensive, and politically difficult. For now, it is far easier to treat loneliness as an individual issue, something people are expected to manage privately, than to confront the systems that produce it. Loneliness is not a personal failing. It is a signal that the way modern life is organized no longer fits the social needs of the people living inside it. And until that mismatch becomes too costly to ignore, the most connected era in human history may also remain one of the loneliest.